WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange returned home to Australia a free man after pleading guilty in a deal that ended his years-long legal battle over the publication of U.S. military secrets. His plane, tracked by thousands, touched down in the Australian capital of Canberra. He embraced his wife and father and raised his clenched fist in a salute to his cheering supporters. Free at last, WikiLeaks said in a post on X, formerly known as Twitter. Drives me fucking crazy that people say that. I'm like, I know what X is and I know what Twitter is. Use them interchangeably, you fuck. You know?
AKA.
His guilty plea was the final chapter in a legal saga that began more than a decade ago when he published a trove of classified documents that embarrassed several governments, in which the U.S. government says threatened national security and aided adversaries. I believe the First Amendment and the Espionage Act are in contradiction with each other, but I accept that it would be difficult to win such a case given all these circumstances, Assange said at the U.S. federal court in Saipan, according to the NBC News affiliate reporter who was there at the hearing. With the help of whistleblower Chelsea Manning, the website leaked about 250,000 State Department diplomatic cables, as well as classified U.S. military documents and videos from the U.S. wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, including video of an Apache helicopter attack in Baghdad that killed civilians. In its 2019 indictment, the Justice Department called it one of the largest compromises of classified information in the history of the United States. Assange's decision to reveal the names of human sources illegally shared with him by Manning created a grave and imminent risk to human life, the department said in a statement after Assange's guilty plea Wednesday. His legal troubles began in 2010. He was arrested in London at the request of Sweden over a sexual assault allegation made by two women in 2012. After he was ordered to be extradited to Sweden, he was granted political asylum by the Ecuadorian Assembly in London, or Embassy. What did I say? Assembly? The Ecuadorian Embassy in London, where he lived for almost 7 years. Websites and organizations like WikiLeaks. Do they serve a role in keeping the government in check?
Yeah, it's such a weird one, right? Because we belong to organizations where operational security was just hammered down our throats about you can't compromise any information. I mean, we see it even going from a military career field and becoming a civilian, and certain things that we can and can't talk about. I mean, I was criticized early on for training civilians in self-defense.
Yeah.
Because you might be teaching some classified tactic and technique. Like what? Like personal defense has nothing to do with free flow CQB or, like deliberate tactics and procedures that I learned in the military. By the way, it's available on Google and you can see it all on Call of Duty. So it's very confusing to me because when I see something like Julian Assange and Edward Snowden's a perfect example we talked about before, I now have become more and more distrusting of the government, having spent a career field in the government and having been educated in understanding what's going on post that experience. I've become less trusting. And so a lot of the things that I've seen that were leaked were specifically, especially in the Snowden case, were specifically showing wrongdoings by the government. Yeah. We're talking about a government that was using LSD to experiment on American civilians in the 70s. Like we're talking about a government that literally started a campaign from, really the 50s until 1975 in the Vietnam War where 60,000 plus Americans were killed that didn't need to die because of corruption. Likely a government that killed JFK. So it's like, what is the check and balance on these organizations that are deeply seated in secrecy, like the CIA, the NSA, so on and so forth? Part of me, because we come from that career field, goes, yeah, there's a lot of operational security. But part of me goes, I'm glad a lot of that came out, because if it didn't, we wouldn't have at least an understanding of what the government is capable of. And for what I know from especially the Edward Snowden circumstance, of listening in on a lot of American citizens with no process or due process, that's scary, man. And look, I want to trust the government because I know there's a lot of good men and women with good intent, but there's also a lot of dark rooms in the middle of these organizations that do a lot of shady stuff that they shouldn't be doing.
When I first heard about Snowden, my initial reaction was, this guy's a fucking traitor.
Yeah.
The more I dug into the programs that he was exposing, my thoughts on it shifted over time, not instantly, but the more I educated myself on the systems that he was exposing and the horrendous and vast overreaches of privacy into the civilian population that our government is supposed to be protecting, it shifted me from thinking that Snowden was a traitor to portions of our government were traitors. And it's like, how do you say they, again, because the government is comprised of people, but there are dark rooms. And the power of some of these systems, though, I mean, Snowden was an individual sitting at a computer terminal that could dive so deeply into people's personal lives, violation of civil rights, privacy rights, Fourth and Fifth Amendment violations. It was insane. It was untapped and it was unchecked. And if the government wanted to, for whatever reason, if there was a watchdog, they could just outsource it to somebody in Europe to use the same systems to look back into the country and say, well, we didn't know that that was actually happening.
Well, he said,
like our rendition program.
Yeah.
Where like we don't torture people, but we might fly them to Egypt and Jordan. We don't know what the fuck they do. Yeah, it's on a CIA registered Gulf Stream. You know, not a big deal, but you know, we're not torturing them. Of course, we're going to use the information, but like our hands are clean.
Yeah.
Who paid the gas tab for the airplane to get there?
Yeah. Yeah. It was unique. I mean, he did a Rogan podcast that was very interesting where he talked about he had access to not only special access programs, which we know exist. I mean, I've been in organizations where in the same room, I was involved in these missions where like these guys in our same organizations were trying to be all secretive. And I'm like, what are you guys doing? Like, what are you guys doing? We can't talk about it. Like, what? Like, we're on the same team. Oh yeah, but we're doing this special access program, this special thing. Like, why would they do that? Why would they partition a team and only a couple guys knew about the special access program? It's like that kind of secrecy within an organization makes you go, what? What are they doing and why are they doing it? Well, there are some operational requirements that you need to do those kind of things, right? When you're part of a special access program, you are very compartmentalized. You're within, you might be one of a few people who understand what that is, even in the same room in the same organization. He had access to all the SAP programs and going in the back door and seeing exactly what they're doing. So he saw all this special access from a perspective of going, oh, wow, nobody's talking to one another and they're doing all these shady things. Where he said he had remote access to basically any of these special access programs. Mm-hmm. And then these programs had remote access to any civilian's back door to be able to look into these people's lives all the time. Like anything they wanted to see, they could see. And that's scary because you think as a law-abiding citizen in this country, you have rights, you have freedoms. You could be being surveilled right now for any justification, any reason with no due process. And that's a problem. That's a huge problem. That's what separates us from all the other Western countries like the UK, Australia, that say they're free. But are they really free? No, they're getting arrested for Facebook posts. So they're not free. We have to protect that. And I think when Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, all these circumstances come out, you have to ask yourself, like, shouldn't we allow some of that to happen? Shouldn't we have specific rights for whistleblowers that are announcing this type of information? And it seems like if it's politically okay at the time, then it's okay. But if it's not, then you have to seek asylum in Russia because you'll never be able to come back to America or we'll put you in prison forever, which is in Edward Snowden's case.
Yeah. I don't know if we are as free as people would like to believe. Also, what does it say? You're in a position like Julian Assange. You're not a hacker yourself. Actually, I think he kind of had a background in that, but he's presented with these documents of a government claiming to do one thing and then having absolute proof that they were doing others. What do you do with it? And what does it say to other journalists or people in that position who are receiving of that information when you're prosecuted to that degree from a government? And they'll always say the same thing. It puts lives at risk, national security. And my thought to that is, I think you need to show me your homework on that. Prove to me that it actually does.
That's always said, right?
It's always said, like the Apache video as an example. It was, I believe, and I'm talking and having not watched it in a long time. I know it was a large group of people that were fired upon. I believe they were journalists. That's not putting anybody's life at danger. That is literally video documentation and proof that war is not precise, that the U.S. government and the U.S. military, cascading its way down, made a mistake in real time and killed innocent people. That's not putting anybody's life in jeopardy. That's not putting anybody's life at risk. That's not national security.
That's accountability.
That's accountability. And you're saying that because you don't want it exposed to the world that those things happened, but they do. And I just wonder what it says to other, because there'll be another Julian Assange. There'll be another WikiLeaks. What does it say to those people when these people are punished for putting things out there that I think at the end of the day, I think the net of people like Snowden and Assange, I think there's a net benefit because it forces the government to change. And here's the thing. All the stuff that's Snowden, I think, reported on, I personally believe that those systems are probably still in place and they've probably actually evolved beyond that. And I don't think the government has stopped doing those things, but I hope it was a massive thorn in the government side. And I say that as somebody who worked for the government for 17 years. I want to have my privacy. I respect other people's privacy. I don't want the government constantly being able to look at every banking transaction that I have. I mean, you're a domestic terrorist. We know this. So you're on a variety of watch lists as it is. But the fact that your name may have actually hit that list, can you imagine the systems that they are now authorized to likely use against you because your name is on that list, whether legitimately or erroneously?
Yeah, I knew this because I had to make the phone call on it. I used to get screened every time I domestic traveled because any domestic travel for me with my trips in between Yemen, Africa, all these places that the government was sending me because they were not talking to the people who were looking at security for the national security of our nation were flagging me because obviously this one guy went to Libya, he must be a terrorist. And so every time I domestic traveled in the country, I would get flagged and pulled into secondary to the extent I had to make phone calls to the CIA and be like, dude, this is insane. I mean, there are points where my phone would heat up like it was being targeted and a whole bunch of random things were happening. I even think I caught surveillance at one time. Mm-hmm. And people are like, oh, you're just paranoid. No, I work for the CIA. I was in special operations. I know how the system works. I know all the things.
And you're a little bit paranoid.
And I'm a little bit paranoid. Like I'm sitting in and driving and my phone starts heating up. And I'm like, that's weird. And I feel it and it's almost hot to where I can't even touch it. And then it shuts off, it shuts down, and then shuts back on. I domestic travel that night, get flagged, pulled into secondary for 2 hours, miss my flight. Have to go back the following day, get flagged on purpose in the same airport, get pulled in secondary again. And I find out I'm on a domestic terrorist watch list because of my international travel. It's like, how is the system so jacked up that they're not talking to each other? What's the government? Like you said, it's people that are just dumb, just in positions of power. The fear I have is for the sake, in the name of security, we're going to do more security and overwatch of American citizens like TSA. I mean, TSA was started because of 9/11, because 19 Saudi Arabians used box cutters to hijack airplanes, crash them into World Trade, into Pennsylvania, into the Pentagon. And that is the reason TSA today is screening you and grilling you and is a multi-billion-dollar organization. Yes, because you allowed it to happen. Yeah. Because you gave them all the latitude, you gave them all the rope. And it's like, what's the limitation? When will government stop growing? When will they not hire 37,000 IRS agents to go after American taxpayers because they need more tax money? This thing is something that we need to pay more attention to and talk about because that's the fear, because it doesn't stop.
Trying to find, what's that famous quote? Those that are willing to sacrifice.
Who's that? Assange?
No. Oh, fuck no.
Who's that from?
Ben Franklin.
Oh, way back.
Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. And you can easily swap those words out for privacy. The Patriot Act is one of the gnarliest things that the U.S. government ever pointed back at as its citizens, all wrapped underneath the banner of being patriotic. Mm. And I think it is still, those programs are still in perpetuity. Each administration is moving them forward and forward and forward. Do you think people like Assange and Snowden should be charged?
Given the litany of all the elements of both their circumstances, and based on what we understand, I get the reason why you would prosecute them and continue to push it, because you want to obviously deter that in the future. But I honestly say no. I mean, I just, based on all the elements and based on the principles they stood on when they did it, it wasn't like this reckless thing that they wanted Americans to get killed. They wanted accountability, especially in Snowden's case. You know, I'm less familiar with Julian Assange's specific motivations, but Snowden, as an NSA contractor, has very specific reasons why, and he could prove it, and he said it. And this dude's in Russia's hands because has nowhere else to go. Because technically, right now, if he came to America, he'd be in a federal prison for the rest of his life.
I don't even think he has a U.S. passport anymore.
Yeah,
I think he actually might be a Russian citizen at this point.
Yeah.
Does the U.S. need people like Snowden and Assange?
I think it's part of what makes America great. I mean, I think there needs to be a balance of powers between the government and the people always, which is why the Second Amendment is important to protect the First Amendment. And I also think the First Amendment, as these guys have openly stated, is one of the important reasons why leaks and whistleblowers need to exist and need to be protected in some way.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on classification? Because you've been part of a military organization I just remember getting inundated by security officers that were like, "This is classified. I'm like, what's classified? Like, what are we even talking about?" I mean, I've had to have conversations with unit commanders that didn't even know what I was doing because they were like, "What do you mean you're doing this?"
Yeah.
"Oh, you haven't been read in?" And so what's your opinion on classification? Because we seemingly overclassify everything in the military.
I think it has its time and place, right? And for people who don't understand, just because you have a security clearance doesn't necessarily mean you are read into something. You have to have a security clearance and a need to know, are essentially the two criteria. And sometimes you can have one and not the other. And sometimes you have both. But if you don't have both, you're not going to get read into the program or be involved in the program. I think it has its place, but I think it can be abused. And I think you can hide really malicious shit and behavior behind this is classified. I think it actually has to mean something. Otherwise, it means nothing, right? It's like any term that is so broad that it applies to everything. It has no meaning whatsoever. And I think a lot of the times, government entities specifically try to hide their bullshit behind that classification without showing the homework as to why. Because then it's like, where's the checks and balances? Well, who's read into it can look at this to determine whether or not it is, you know what I mean? It becomes this whole bucket. It's like trying to view the world through clam chowder. You just can't see through the bowl. And I think a lot of gnarly stuff happens in the background when you do that.
It's a very select group in government, in every organization, that has that power. And it seems like that's not a good thing. That can't be healthy.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been in CIA bases where the chief of base didn't even know who did the Pred strike. Like, you're the chief of base, you're in charge of the CIA in this base, and somebody just did a Pred strike in our backyard and you don't even know who did that? Well, I wasn't read on. Like, what? That's how this works? It's crazy, man. Like, the whole security thing is crazy. I get it. Like you said, I get it.
It can be abused, though.
It could be abused.
I think we have to have people who are willing to risk it all to step out in front of the government and say, what you are doing is wrong, and I'm going to show it to the world regardless of what you do to me. I think they can have the potential to change the trajectory of the future, but it takes those people to be able to do that. And you might destroy your own personal life because of it.
Yep.